Well, without further ado, I'll go ahead and announce our first speaker of the block, Tammy Gregerson. Tammy, if you can turn your camera and mic on, I'll give you a quick introduction while you get that set. Great. So, thank you, Tammy. Tammy is a professor of TESOL at the American University in Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. She is first and foremost a teacher, but she's also a co-author of a few different books, including one from Oxford University Press, co-authored with Sarah Mercer on teacher well-being. And we're very happy to have her join us today to talk about tackling emotional fallout of climate change in ELT. So, Tammy, I'll go ahead and welcome you on screen.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you everybody for being here. I'm always thrilled to talk to teachers across the world. And one of the things, look, here's the thing. One of the things that draws us all together is the fact that we're English teachers, that we have this passion for language and we have a passion for reaching out and, trying to find a means of communication to bring us all, all together across the world. Well, today I'm going to be talking about something that also brings us together. And that is the fact that we all share this planet. So, you know what, I was reading something the other day. We don't have a choice. This is where we are. This is where we live, and there's not living on the moon. So it's a very interesting thing that we're all together in this, and we're in this together in English, and we're in this together because we live in the same planet. So my talk today is a very interesting one. Other colleagues of mine in ELTOC are going to be talking to you about what you can do with your learners in terms of working with the global skill of increasing empathy for the environment. But I'm going to be talking to you about climate change, but in a different way. Because essentially what happens is that sometimes the feelings that we have about climate change put us into a kind of nasty headspace. And even though sometimes those headspaces are necessary to provoke action, sometimes they actually become very detrimental to our well-being. And so what I want to do today is not necessarily talk about what we can do to help the planet, but what we can do to help our kids find that good headspace to really be important people in terms of doing what they need to do to help the planet. So without further ado, I'm going to be talking about tackling the emotional fallout, right? And so let's get started. One second. Okay. So today we're going to be talking, and here's what we're going to be doing on the rundown. We're going to be talking about emotion in general, because just because it's climate change doesn't mean that the general emotions that we feel aren't also related to the same topic. So we're going to talk about emotions in general. Then specifically, we're going to talk about two emotions that are generated because of feelings of climate change. One of them is eco guilt, and the other is eco anxiety. Now you might think, whoa, are you making this up? No, I'm not. And in fact, there are therapists across the world who specialize in dealing with these two maladies, right? So we're going to be talking about them, and we're going to be talking about what they are, what they do, and how we can deal with it. And then lastly, we're going to talk about classroom activities, things that we can do to actually kind of therapeutically move students into a better headspace so that they can really tackle climate change in a very positive way. So are we ready to go? Here we are. Okay. Number one, in terms of emotions in general, we need to understand something very important, and that is that negative emotions are not always bad. We tend to think of this idea of good emotions and bad emotions, and that we need to get rid of the negative and just stick with the positive. Well, you know what? That's not necessarily true. I mean, if we look at the evolution of human behavior, negative emotions play a very important part in survival, right? I mean, if you were living in the Wild West and you saw a bear and you felt fear, fear is usually considered a negative emotion, but fear would make you run, right? So it's not, so negative emotions are not always bad. Negative emotions provoke us to do things. I mean, take a look in our daily lives, right? I mean, so say, for example, we start feeling a certain degree of, well, how about jealousy in a relationship, right? Well, you know what? That jealousy is a negative emotion, but maybe it means, hey, maybe I better start paying a little bit more attention to what's going on in that relationship, right? So negative emotions are not always bad. They also do something very important in that they juxtapose to positive emotion, right? So how would we know what a good emotion is if we never experienced a bad one? Now, there's a woman named Barbara Fredrickson. She's actually an academic, and she came up with what was called the broaden and build theory of emotion. Fantastic idea. Barbara Fredrickson, 2001, 2005. She writes on it quite a bit. She's written 2 or 3 books on it as well. What she suggests is that there's kind of like an emotional ratio that we should try and experience, which means that for every one negative emotion, in order to feel well-being, we should probably have 3. So it's the kind of like, I mean, we're playing with numbers, right? But she talks about a 3-to-1 ratio. So it means that we're not trying to eradicate negative emotion. It means that we're just trying to, in the balance of life, have more positive emotion in our lives than negative emotion. Okay. So number 1, negative emotion is not always bad. Now, it spurs us to action. I mentioned that. Now, when we need to be experiencing and accepting negative emotion. Why? Because it's vital to our mental health, right? We need to experience it and we need to accept it. And I think in that acceptance of it, there's a certain healthful quality about it. There's a healthy quality about it. Now, the fact of the matter is, if we don't accept it, we don't recognize that we're experiencing it, it means that we're suppressing. And that suppression can backfire and diminish our sense of contentment. Now, if any of you have ever heard of something called emotional labor, it's a very common thing that teachers feel. Emotional labor is this thing that we have when, because we're a caring profession, we we have this expectation of having to suppress or at least not demonstrate negative emotion. So when we're in the classroom and we feel annoyed, it's not real professional for us to show anger or to show frustration, right? And so we mask that, right? And so that kind of emotional labor isn't necessarily a bad thing until it overwhelms us, right? So there's a certain degree of suppression that becomes toxic. Okay. Now we're going to be talking, in here, when we tackle the emotional fallout of climate change, we can talk about well-being in 2 different ways. Okay. We can talk about well-being in the sense of being hedonic. And hedonic well-being is what we would know as pleasure, right? Being happy, enjoying something, right? We seek that out a lot, don't we? We seek that out a lot. Indulging in our favorite dessert, for example, is one of the ways that we do that. It's pleasurable, right? But that's not all that well-being is all about. Well-being is not just the seeking of pleasure. And I think that that's where a lot of people kind of have this question about positive psychology. It's kind of like, oh, it's happyology. Oh, it's like, oh, let's all join hands and sing Kumbaya. But it's not like that either, because it's got to be balanced with eudaimonic well-being. And eudaimonic well-being means that we seek meaning and purpose in our lives, right? It means that we've accomplished some very important things, something bigger than ourselves, right? And I think that I think that one of the things that brings us all together today is that there's a lot of eudaimonic well-being in being a teacher. I don't think many of us become teachers because it makes a lot of money. I think most of us become teachers because we love people and we find meaning and purpose in helping others and having a high impact on the future. And so when we talk about well-being, we've got to look at both. We've got to look at the pleasure of life, the enjoyment of life, but we also have to look at finding the meaning and purpose. Okay. Now, let's talk about socio-emotional competence, and we have to talk about all of these things before I get into the echo guilt and the echo anxiety, okay? Because one of the ideas about socio-emotional competence is self-awareness. And self-awareness is a huge idea when we talk about the guilt and the anxiety that we're going to talk about about the environment in a minute. Now, when we talk about self-awareness, this emotional awareness, it involves three stages, okay? It doesn't happen one without the other. First of all, we have to recognize that we're feeling an emotion. It's funny because oftentimes, I don't know how often, I mean, think about it, how often it happens to you, but it happens to all of us probably to different degrees, where we have a physiological response, right? That means we're having an emotion. Maybe our palms are sweating, maybe our mouth is getting dry, or maybe we get the jitters. And we're having that physiological response, but we kind of don't make ourselves aware of it. And so the first idea is knowing that we're experiencing it, recognizing that we're having an emotion, right? The second part is it's not only recognizing that it's an emotion, but what emotion is it, right? It happens a lot in the classroom, right? That feeling of happy, something just happened. That is so amazing. Johnny, who never says anything, just put together the perfectly syntactically correct sentence. He hasn't done that in weeks. That's amazing. I'm so happy, right? Or we have, the annoyance of, how about cell phones? How about cell phones in the classroom? I don't know about you, but that kind of is annoying to me. So I have an experience of an emotion and I have to label it. I am annoyed. Okay. And then once we identify what the emotion is, and remember, this is all about self-awareness, we need to know how it affects us and how it's functioning, right? So if I know that I'm annoyed because Sheila in the back of the room is on her phone, I have to recognize that I'm feeling annoyed. And I have to realize that if I don't get control of that I might respond in a way that, had I been more self-aware, I may not have made that choice. Okay. So now, these are the cornerstones of socio-emotional competence. That's called self-awareness. And that self-awareness means recognizing, identifying, and being aware of the effect and function of whatever emotion it is that we're having. Okay. Now, self-regulation is very, very closely related. Okay. And let me define it. How we influence which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we experience and express them. Now, there's Gross in 1999. He came up with 5 different strategies. 3 of them, the first 3 are like antecedents, and the last 2 are more responsive. So when I say that they're antecedents, they're things that we might be doing that that we can do before the fact, right? They're strategies that happen before the fact. The last 2 are ones that are responsive. We've felt it, we've done it. Okay, we've felt it. Now let's act upon it. Let's do something about it, right? So, what are strategies for emotional regulation? Number 1, avoidance. Simply avoidance. If you know that you've got a trigger, avoid the trigger. Simple. Avoid the trigger when you can. Sometimes you can't, right? Number 2, modify the situation. Okay, so you're in a situation, you've got something that's kind of annoying. Oh, let's go back to the cell phone. Let's go back to Sheila. Hey, Sheila, on that cell phone. Modify the situation. Hey, you know what, Sheila? Why don't you come up, sit up in front here for a while? Sit next to me. I'm missing you, sweetie. Come on up here. I'm sure she's not going to be on her cell phone when she's right in front of you, right? Modify the situation because you know that's going to annoy you. Number 3, choose where to focus your attention, right? So say, for example, you have a colleague in a meeting that's always very frustrating to you, and the thing is that you have a choice of whether to pay attention to what this person is doing during the meeting or put your attention onto somebody else who's a little bit more pleasant, right? So it's just about choosing where to focus your attention. Now, these are the antecedent ones, right? But then let's say it's already there. It's there. It's the emotion is in front of us. So it could be changing your way of thinking. Changing your way of thinking is what we call in psychological terms cognitive reappraisal. Doesn't that sound cool? Cognitive reappraisal. Let's put it in vernacular. It's find a silver lining. It's looking at the glass half full. Okay, so changing your way of thinking means looking at the bright side of life, looking at, okay, yeah, this is nasty business. I'm not happy about it, but here's something good that happened about it, right? So, pandemic, I can't get my hair done because the beauty shops are all closed. So, I've got to go to the grocery store and start doing my own hair. Well, you know what? Saved $100. Woohoo! Good for me, right? Cognitive reappraisal might not look as good, but boy, I saved a lot of money. Or decide on your post-emotional response. Now, here's the thing about that. A lot of times, and think about this, a lot of times we have things happen to us, right? And we have no control over what happens to us. But what we do have control over is how we respond, right? I might not be able to control Sheila, right? But I do have control over how I respond to her, right? So these are ways that I can post-emotionally respond. What do I do with the emotion? I'm already frustrated. Yeah, you know what? She does this every day. She ticks me off, right? But I get to decide. I get to decide. I'm Tammy. I'm not Sheila, and I get to decide about how I want to feel about Sheila. Okay? Now, these are all important backdrops about emotion in general that are going to give us a good frame for what we're going to talk about next, which is the more echo-related things. Okay, now, there may be other emotions that are generated by climate change, but I'm going to focus specifically on two. And I'm going to be focusing on the negative emotions that occur from eco guilt and eco anxiety. And you can probably deduce from the words guilt and anxiety that one is a little bit more severe than the other. Okay. Let's talk about first about eco guilt. What is that and what do we do about it? Okay. Eco guilt. We're going to define it today as remorse over not meeting personal or societal standards for environmental behavior. You know, there's no going back on this. I mean, anybody who doesn't understand that we have a serious problem in climate change has their head stuck in the sand, right? And there's no going back with this. It does, I mean, we do have a problem. And so now the question is, how are we going to respond to it? How are we going to respond to it as individuals, as a collective, and as maybe people working with or against, maybe even against, the big corporations that are causing most of the problem. So now, again, we're going to go back to what do we have control over? We don't have control over everything. We have control over our own actions, right? So, what is eco guilt? I just was coming on just now with Josh, right? And I was making a joke to Josh about, yep, I'm ready to go, Josh. I've got my reusable cup, right? I refuse to use styrofoam. If that's what the choice is in the restaurant, I say I'll drink in. Thank you. I'll stay here and you can serve it to me in a ceramic mug, right? How about this idea of handing out worksheets when in all actuality you could have posted it on the school platform and had them do it on the blackboard on digitally when you can, right? I'm not saying that everybody has access to that kind of technology, right? So, right. You have a choice at lunch. Hey, that big burger that took how much energy to feed that cow that was then slaughtered, that was then packaged, that was then put in plastic and put on styrofoam and then was cooked. How much energy did it take to make that burger, right? Why don't we just have a salad? Not healthier. And for you and the environment, right? Okay. So now let's take a look. We just got done talking about what is eco guilt, and we need to be talking about what, how useful it is. How useful is it? Because there are different positions on this. Okay, psychologists have two different positions on this. Um, the question is guilt a motivator? Are we motivated by guilt? Some people maybe more than others, but here's what the researchers say. One side of the argument, they're going to be saying that guilt motivates us to make reparation. Okay. Guilt spurs us, it provokes us to pro environmental action, right? It forces us to make better choices and to be better people. Okay. That's what guilt might do. I would suggest that I'm probably a motivated by guilt type of person. Um, I grew up in a very religious home, so guilt was a good way to get us to do stuff. However, guilt can also cause you denial, right? So you instead of guilt, you don't want to feel the guilt, so you're going to deny whatever it was that the guilt was provoking, right? So the last thing that eco advocates want is for you to go into denial, right? So what are they saying there? They're saying that guilt may cause denial, or it may motivate intention. Okay, so I might feel guilt, I might have the intention to do something, but what we're finding in a lot of the research on eco guilt is that even though we have the intention to do what's right, we don't follow through, right? And so even though my intention is not to drink coffee from a styrofoam cup, heck, if that's all they've got, I'll have my cup of coffee in a styrofoam cup, right? So we have the intention of doing it. Oh, you know what? I have the intention of not making photocopies, but oh, darn, I forgot to put it online. There's the photocopier. I'll just make my photocopies, right? So we've got the intention to do it, but we don't necessarily follow through. So that's the other thing that guilt does. It might really provoke us to good, solid action, or it might send us into denial and good intentions. But we know what the road to where the road to good intention leads us, right? If you don't know, Google it. Where does the road to good intentions lead us? Look it up online. Okay. Now, I love this idea. I love this idea because it reframes the whole guilt idea. Okay, let's make pro-environmental action accessible to all. Let's take that guilt and that intention to act and make it real. Let's follow through on the intention. But how do we want to follow through on the intention? You know what? We don't want to leave it as I'm doing this because I'm feeling guilty about it. What I would like us to do is to say, I'm doing this and I feel really proud that I've done it. Right? So don't make what you're doing something that was done because of guilt, but do it so that you can feel a sense of pride. Okay, you know what? This in here is Coke Zero. You know what? I've got a big bottle that I can just dump it in, and then I recycle my recyclable bottle, right? I am proud of myself. I've got my recyclable cup, right? I take pride in that because I'll tell you something. I used to drink out of styrofoam and out of plastic all the time, but now I don't because I felt guilty about it. But now that I've taken action, I feel pride. Okay, so we're reframing this so that the emotion isn't negative, but rather one that's going to provoke even further action. We work much more, what's the word, effectively when we work out of pride than when we work out of guilt. Okay, next. Now we're going to talk about echo anxiety. A little bit stronger emotion. Okay, and this can get a little bit dicey. Okay, what is echo anxiety? What is the origin, first of all? The experts on echo anxiety say that it exists because we have guilt over our carbon footprint. It starts with guilt. But here's the thing. Remember, I talked about the issue of control and that we have control over our own actions, but we can't control the entire world. We can't control what large corporations are doing, right? We can't control the fast fashion industry. We can't control, the energy corporations that dump things into our clean water supplies. So no single person can resolve climate change alone. It can't happen. We can't do it alone. Okay. What it requires is just global commitment to sweeping change. And isn't it exciting that we're all sitting here? I was so excited when I was here from the very beginning when you guys first came into the room, and I saw people from Peru, and I saw people from Indonesia and Malaysia and Dubai and South America and Canada. And I was like, whoa, you know what? We're all coming together from all parts of the world. And you know what? If we can all come together from all parts of the world to come to a webinar on climate change, then you know what? We can come together and make a difference, right? So now for climate change, for us to be able to make a difference, it takes sweeping changes across the world. It's not going to be one country that's going to do it. It's going to take all of us. And you know what? All of us are teachers. And we're teachers. We're important because we change the future, right? That's the one thing about being a teacher. We change the future. So now, the problem with feeling that of not having that total control is that my own individual effort might seem like merely a token. You know what? Who cares if I only flush the toilet once a day? That's not going to do it. That's not going to help much. But yes, it's going to. If we all just flush the toilet once a day, imagine how much water we save. Now, that's just a really bad example. But how about this one? How about if we all shut off the faucet when we are brushing our teeth? You put your toothpaste on, you get your toothbrush wet, you shut the water off. Because you're supposed to sing happy birthday twice as you're brushing, right? Can you imagine if the entire world sang happy birthday twice with the water off? How much water we would save? I mean, we're talking about millions of people a day singing happy birthday twice. That's amazing. Okay. But seriously, you know what? That powerlessness about not being able to do it, about not having that control, that powerlessness incites echo anxiety. That's where it comes from. So the origins of echo anxiety actually come from the fact that we know that individually we can't do this and we're powerless to do it on our own. Okay, but let's take a look at some of the things we can do. Now, a lot of our students, you know what, and I do want to say that I'm not talking just to teach, I'm talking to teachers right now, right? But you have access to the students that I don't have. I have access to you. And so what I'm doing is I'm talking to you so that you can talk to your students. And so this webinar today is for all of us. It's for you to shut off the water when you brush your teeth, for me to shut the water off, and also for your students to do the same thing. Okay. So I wanted to have that caveat that it's not just the teachers I'm talking to, but the teachers who talk to their kids, who talk to their parents, who talk to them, whatever. Okay. So now, what is the definition? Not just the origin, but the definition. These are persistent worries about the future of the earth and the life that it shelters. Persistent worries about the future of the earth and the life it shelters. Don't you find it very interesting that sometimes we call her Mother Earth? Think about that. Mother Earth. Um, anytime you invoke mother, it's a serious issue, right? Don't invoke mother unless you're serious. Okay, next. What are factors behind eco anxiety? There's mostly two things. One of them is the media coverage. We know that the media is fixated on climate change. It's not a bad thing. Climate change is a lot of is really generated by a lot of media coverage, right? It's there, it's in our faces. However, if we're doom scrolling, I love that word. Doom scrolling, right? We doom scroll through our Instagram, doom scroll through our Twitter. We look for things on climate change. That's probably not going to be very healthy. It's also, for me, for example, when ugly things are going on in the world, and I've heard it once on the news in the morning, I don't want to be doom scrolling all day about the same thing, right? So the media coverage is driving a lot of eco anxiety. So one of the things we need to be considering is stop the doom scrolling. Okay. The other thing, and this is one that breaks my heart, is the fact that people live through this. If you've lived or your students have lived in a part of the planet that is particularly prone to the effects of climate change. I mean, if you're connecting from California and the wildfires, if you're connecting from the Caribbean and the incredible hurricanes that have been going on, if you're in a place that used to get a lot of water for your crops, and now you're living through drought and there's a food shortage where you live, if you're living it, that eco anxiety is going to be a lot stronger, right? So hearing about it and doom scrolling about it is one thing, right? But living through it, oh, sweetie, right? It's a whole nother thing. So let's see what we can do about it. Okay. So now we're talking with our students, right? And we're looking at our students, and we're trying really hard to integrate 21st century skills into our curriculum. And we're trying very hard to look at the United Nations sustainability goals. And we're English teachers, and we're doing our best to do the best we can to work with climate change, right? And to make our learners aware of the things and the small changes that they can do, the big changes they can do to help the planet. But at the same time, that awareness, that talking about it is going to exacerbate feelings. So now, what does it feel to go beyond just being concerned about the environment to actually having to deal with eco anxiety? So, number one, fatalistic thinking. You know what? There's nothing to do about this. This is just a horrible thing. It's catastrophizing, right? It's catastrophizing. Number two, existential dread. This is going to kill us all, right? It's going to kill us all. Number three, hopelessness about the planet's changes. I don't know. Did you guys know that there's a clock in Times Square in New York that's ticking down the minutes to when it's no longer reversible, right? So we still have hope. But boy, I don't want to be around in Times Square when that clock ticks zero, right? Guilt related to our own carbon footprint, right? PTSD after experiencing the effects of climate change, that post-traumatic stress that we feel when that hurricane is hit, or when that the wildfire destroyed homes, right? That trauma that we had, feelings of depression, anxiety, or panic, grief over the loss of natural environments and wildlife. I have a good friend who some of you might know, Sarah Mercer. She just got back from a safari in Africa, and I was just with her last weekend, and she was talking about the poaching that was going on. And you know what? I was so deeply affected by what she was saying about the rhinoceroses and how they're trying to be protected. And it was like I suddenly felt this in the pit of my stomach, this horrible feeling of, I mean, it was kind of like In Spanish, we say vergüenza ajena. I felt this deep shame for somebody else's behavior, right? It was awful. Obsessive thoughts about the climate. All of these things are feelings that we've got to be watching out for and dealing with with our students. Anger towards those not acknowledging climate change. I go nuts if I go on these news programs and there's a debate that, oh no, this is just the natural cycle of the planet. This happened, you know what? This happens every 100 years. No, no, no. Right? So yeah, so we get that kind of anger about those who aren't taking this seriously. And then maybe there's frustration with generations past that didn't make enough progress. You know, for me, I you know, I cut them a little slack because who knew when they, you know, made the spray deodorants that that aerosol was actually going to be a huge problem in the environment. I don't think they would have done it on purpose, but still, maybe they didn't act fast enough, right? So all of these things are things that we can feel and that our students can feel that we need to be watching out for. Okay, let's go on now to what to do about it. Oh, not yet. Because these feelings, what do they do? So you're feeling these anxieties, you're feeling these catastrophizing, your students are doing it too. So what do you notice? You notice that your students are having problems sleeping, that there's a lack of appetite, they don't concentrate well. There might be tensions in their family, particularly if there's disagreements about climate change. In my family, that exists, right? I'm a very progressive thinker, and so climate change is a huge issue in my life and in my thinking. But my family is uber conservative, and you know they're the ones who say, we need the trees being cut down in the rainforest because we need to build houses. Well, you know what? No, you need to be sustainable, guys, right? So even, you know, we've in my family, at least in not my kids, but me being the kid of my father and my brothers and sisters, that's a conversation we don't have over the dinner table, right? So there's those kinds of tensions in families. And then the last is seeking distractions and less than ideal coping strategies, right? Avoidant coping, right? Avoidant coping. We mentioned a little bit before denial. We can talk about substance abuse. We can talk about all kinds of things that are avoidant coping rather than approach coping. But that's for another webinar. I can do a whole webinar on coping strategies. Okay, let's move on then. Okay, so now this is what I want you to do. Here we've got an activity. So everybody, put your coffee cup aside. I want you to get out a piece of paper or just, you know, take a pen and write on your hand. Then you don't have to use paper. Wash your hand later, but you know, let's not even use paper, guys, even though it's recyclable. Write it on your hand. Okay, I'm going to show you a slide next, and it's got 8 items. And you will, so you're going to see these 8 items that measure your worry about climate change. And then I want you to use a scale of 1 to 5. This is called a Likert scale. And I want you to put your number. Now, look, we're not totaling any responses. This is just going item by item. And what I want you to do is just be aware. This is just an awareness raising activity. And it's also an awareness raising activity that I'd like you to do with your students. So come back to this slide later, maybe in the next slide, maybe take a screenshot, you know, come back to it online, whatever. But these are some very interesting items that you and your students can talk about that will begin a conversation about eco-anxiety and eco-guilt. Here goes the 8 items, and on a scale from 1 to 5. Ready? Here we go. Okay. This is actually from Stewart 2021, brand new. It's called the Climate Change Worry Scale. On the bottom in green, you're going to see the Likert scale. Here we go. Question number 1. I worry about climate change more than most other people. 1 is never, 2 is rarely, 3 sometimes, 4 often, 5 always. Number 2, thoughts about climate change cause me worry about what the future holds. Thoughts about climate change cause me worry about what the future holds. Okay. Number 3, I tend to seek out media information about climate change. That's like you go to the TV, the internet, you scroll, you're doom scrolling on Instagram or Twitter. I tend to seek out media information about climate change. Okay. Number 4, I tend to worry when I hear about climate change, even when effects of climate change may be some time away, or maybe in another part of the planet, right? I tend to worry when I hear about climate change, even when the effects of climate change may be some time away, or in another part of the world. Okay. Number 5, I worry that outbreaks of severe weather may be the result of changing climate. Number 5, I'll read it again. I worry that outbreaks of severe weather may be the result of changing climate. Gosh, right? Those tornadoes are nasty business. I used to live in the Midwest of the United States, and whoa, if you've never experienced a tornado, but I'm sure that you people who live in hurricane places can tell me the same thing. So we won't have a contest, I promise. Yeah, okay. Well, my weather is worse than yours. Okay. Number 6, I worry about climate change so much I feel paralyzed to do anything about it. I worry about climate change so much I feel paralyzed to do anything about it. Number 7, I worry that I might not be able to cope with climate change. I worry that I might not be able to cope with climate change. And number 8, I notice that I have been worrying about climate change. I notice that I have been worrying about climate change. Now, you see, guys, it's your own self-awareness, and it'll tell you a little bit about, about your own headspace. But it's also something that these 8 items, talking to your students about, will give you an idea about where their headspace is. Because particularly if we're going to be weaving ideas and objectives in our classes, content objectives about climate change, it's good to know what headspace they're in, right? So how tenderly, how sensitively do we have to approach the topic, right? So here we go. This is just it's a quick and easy one. If you need to change the language to make it more accessible to your learners, scale down the language, use different, synonyms, circumlocute it, whatever you need to do, but try and get what they're feeling, okay? Before we even begin content talk about climate. Next. Okay, let's talk about overcoming it. Here we go. Address it like other anxiety-related orders. So remember that I talked about in the beginning about emotion in general? Well, the same ideas about emotional in general, about anxiety in general, can also be applied to anxiety that exists because of the environment. Okay? So, number 1, looking for the positives. Now you're going to say, positives? What the heck? What kind of positives are there that that wildfires are destroying California and hurricanes are ripping the coasts, and the island is going to disappear because the glaciers are melting? Well, you know what? There are some positives, because there's some very positive actions being taken in the world by large corporations, by governments, by climate accords. So if we can look at things, at movement towards good things that are happening, that might calm part of the anxiety, right? Action is being taken, and it's not, climate change still is not irreversible. Practicing emotional regulation. We talked about that in the previous slide, right? Knowing what steps to take depending on where you are in the regulatory scale. Developing resilience in face of adversities. Anything that works at building your resilience, like exercise, meditation, cognitive reframing, right? Any of those kinds of things that help to build resilience in other things are also going to help build resilience in echo anxiety. Now, I think that for me, and for the researchers that have been looking at this, the most important thing to do is do your bit for the planet, right? Show that you've been taking some action and that you're moving forward towards a goal. So here's the idea. In order to start overcoming echo anxiety, we need to start promoting a sustainable lifestyle in ourselves and in others. So we do, what, look for, what, when there's what do they say, when there's one finger pointing out, there's three pointing back, right? So let's do it. Let's do something ourselves and be the role models for other people, so we can say, hey, you know what, I don't use plastic straws. And then, you know what, when it's a time for lunch with your friends, pull out your stainless steel straw, right? And you be the one to be the instigator of change. Next, I'm going to talk about a few maxims, and it looks like I've got to hurry here a little bit. Number one, act out of pride and hope and not guilt. I mentioned this a little bit before. It's always a better motivator. Pride is a better motivator than guilt. So let's work it from that point of view first. I've got a really cool activity here, and I'll go through it real quick. So this is called a pride chain. So what I want you to do is have your learners, give each learner a colored strip of paper, not too long, maybe 2 inches, and have them write 5 eco-friendly things that they do. 5 things that they do that are eco-friendly, that they purposely do every day consciously. Okay? And then have them connect these strips in a chain. So you curl the one into the other, so you make these chains like this, and you staple it, right? Or you glue it, or whatever you do. And then have your learners stand from one end of the room to the other end of the room and hold their portion of the chain. They're going to feel togetherness. They're going to feel that as a group, they're taking action. And then as a writing activity or as a speaking activity, tell them to respond. How did that make them feel? What did it make them feel more desirous of making change, right? And then, of course, you're going to hang that chain in your classroom to continually remind them that they need to be taking those actions. And they take the actions out of pride because they're doing it, and they're not taking it out of guilt because they haven't done it. How about this? Positive reappraisal. Now, positive reappraisal does not make you deny the fact that there's a serious problem. But what it does do, it acknowledges the negative, but it allows us to switch our perspective to see the small positive trends that are occurring, right? It's what I told you about before, that cognitive reappraisal. Find the silver lining, see the glass half full. Things are moving in the direction. People are becoming more aware. Let's focus on that without forgetting that we have to take action. Okay. Maxim number 2, define your attributions. Over what do I have control, right? For us control freaks, to think that you can single-handedly turn around the effects of climate change is absolutely ridiculous. Find out what you yourself, you as a person, each individual student in your class, what do you have control over? So now, how do you do it? How do you do your bit? Number 1, raise awareness of the problem. To others. 2, consume and recycle responsibly, right? If you're into fast fashion, cut it out. Go to Goodwill, go to the charity bazaar, buy something recycled. It's kind of like, going and buying a purebred dog. Are you kidding me? Go to the shelter. We've got plenty of mutts, right? Consume and recycle responsibly. 3, do sustainable activities. You know what? If you're going to plant a garden, you know what? You'll eat those vegetables, but you're going to plant that garden again, right? Get an electric car when you have enough money. If you have enough money, get an electric car instead of a gas guzzler, right? Move about and eat sustainably. You know what? Walk, ride your bike, use public transportation. Don't ride your car by yourself. If you have to ride in a personal car, carpool, right? Eat sustainably. Think about the meat consumption that you've got, that you've been working with. Okay. If you're eating a lot of meat, think about what you can do to change your diet to make sure that you're eating more sustainably. And then, of course, you're going to avoid those little things that pollute. Okay, don't you dare throw pieces of paper on the ground, right? Okay. Anyway, moving on. Take action on personal habits. Okay. Now, these are things that I also want you to talk about with your students and work through with your students, because that was part of the idea of this webinar today, was to give you classroom ideas. Adopting greener lifestyles improves our outlook. We're going to feel good about doing the right thing. Modeling climate-friendly behaviors encourages others to do the same. How do we do this? Number one, let's calculate our carbon footprint. I'm going to show you how to do that next. 2, invent ways to improve physical and mental health. Okay? And number 3, get involved. Get involved. You know what? Right now, I'm going to show you how to calculate your carbon footprint. This is kind of fun. And I'm not going to have time to go through it 100% here. Wait a minute. There we are. Oops. This is part A. On the next slide, just like I did before, I have 10 yes or no questions to calculate your carbon footprint. Okay, there's 10 items. Now, on a separate piece of paper, I want you to put 1 for yes and 0 for no. Now, this does have a total score. This has a total score. Your highest is going to be 10, your lowest is going to be 0. And the closer you are to 10, the less visible your carbon footprint. A 10 is good, a 0 is bad. Okay, now do this with your students. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's take a look at what are some of the items. Number 1, do you turn your lights off when you leave a room? Yes or no? Do you get to school by walking, biking, or using public transportation? 1, yes. 0, no. Do you attempt to stay away from meat products? I'm not saying you got to be a vegan, you got to be a vegetarian, but I'm just saying, be conscious of it. For goodness sakes, be conscious of it. Number 4, do you unplug appliances or chargers when not in use? Number 5, do you dry your clothes without using a dryer? I get a 0 on that one. I'm very bad. Number 6, do you turn off the water when brushing your teeth? I've started doing that because I worked on this webinar and now I can't help but do it. Number 7, do you turn off the TV when you're not watching it? Gosh, that's a huge one. Do you turn off the TV when you're not watching it? Do you turn off your video game system when you're not using it? Number 9, do you recycle? Do you recycle? You know what? I've got cans now in my house of different garbages for different things. And so I know that I have to put tin in one, paper in another, plastic in another, and I bring them to the different places at the recycling, right? Do you recycle? And then last, do you donate or recycle clothing when you no longer want it? Particularly for all of you fashion ladies and gentlemen. You know what? We can all, bring your clothes over to the Goodwill. Bring them over to the charities. Bring them over to people who need it. There are now also fashion companies that are taking your used clothing and actually putting them down back into threads and recreating the clothing, right? Find those places and dump your old clothes in a place that's not going to be a landfill. Okay, so now we've got your carbon footprint here. Do it with your students. Ask them these things. Tell them, ask them how they're going to work it through. Okay, then you can do this. It's kind of like a contract with them. Have a contract with them. These are the things I'm going to turn off. These are the ways I'm going to get to school. These are the things I'm going to eat. This is how I'm going to use my electronics. This is how I'm going to recycle. And then, what a cool idea. Why don't you brainstorm some other ideas that you can use to have to help your carbon footprint? And I'm almost done here. Say no to denial. You cannot ignore eco anxiety because that does not make it disappear. So you have to stop masking those feelings because they're going to only intensify. You have to acknowledge the reality. You have to exercise self-forgiveness. You have to commit yourself to eco-friendly choices. Practice self-compassion. And you know what? Most of all, enjoy the beautiful beaches, trails, and lakes that you want to protect, because that's going to motivate you to keep them clean. Now, self-compassion is something that you need to do. Be kind to yourself. Treat yourself as if you're your own best friend. Okay, this self-compassion journal is all about self-compassion and being your best friend. When you start getting down on yourself, write it down on a piece of paper, reread it, and respond to it as if it's your best friend responding to you. Number 4, connect to your classroom and your community. When you can do this together, you're going to feel like it's a group effort, and you're going to feel much more together, that there's way more that you're doing because you're doing it in a group, right? And so you collaborate in classroom projects, you work with like-minded others, you increase the resilience and optimism of the people who are around you, because you know why? Voices ring louder in unison than one voice alone in the desert. So with citizen science and everybody working on it, we're going to be doing this together, because everybody is an environmental scientist, and we can become involved in understanding climate change while at the same time becoming more aware. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it with our students. Let's talk about it so it dulls its intensity, so that we can legitimize our learners' concerns and expressions. We can validate their distress. We can listen to their questions. We can offer age-appropriate advice and continue to have open and honest conversations. And these are just ways that we know as teachers. Do gallery walks, do fish bowls, do affinity mapping, all of those wonderful ways that as teachers we know how to have discussions with our kids. So I know that I have only 3 minutes left of questions. I got just so excited I couldn't stop talking, and I'm sorry that I have so little time for questions. Josh, forgive me.
No problem. I'll pop a couple questions on screen. Maybe we can handle one or two. So let me pop
Okay.
one on screen now.
How to handle our negative emotions in the class so it will not affect our students, and how to change it to be positive emotions. Yeah, you know what? As an individual person, if you've got that negative echo guilt, that echo anxiety, first of all, we have to recognize that we have it, right? And you know what? We do know that as teachers, we have to participate in emotional labor. Sometimes we have to mask our own feelings of anxiety and our own feelings of guilt. So the idea is put on that mask of emotional labor, while at the same time working with the kids in those positive ways that I mentioned, so that we can kind of reverse that negative thinking through talking about it, first of all, by doing things about it, by doing the small things that we can do. And then, of course, when they do it, make them proud of the actions that they're doing, so that it's not the guilt that motivates them, but the pride. How's that?
Perfect. Let's take one more, and then, sorry we can't get to all the questions, but let's just take one more, and then we'll say goodbye to you.
Okay. Hi, Tammy. Hi. Is it all right to encourage our students to show their negative emotions that could help them identify more of their real personality? You know what? 100%. You know what? Give them the space to say, I'm afraid. You know what? I'm really concerned. I have a daughter who said, Mom, I don't want to have kids because I don't know if the planet's going to exist long enough for them to have kids. Right. So yeah, we've got to talk about this. And there's no denying that we need to talk about it. I think that, like most negative emotions, that when we talk about it, we can work it through and stop the catastrophizing and brainstorm ways that we can take the ideas, because you know what? It's not irreversible yet. The Times Square clock hasn't ticked to zero.
All right. Wonderful. All right. That's all the time we have. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but thank you so
I'm
much,
so naughty.
Tammy. Wonderful
Yeah, I'm so
session.
naughty. I'm so sorry. Thanks, Josh. I am so naughty.
Thank you very much. And have a nice day.
I will. Night.
Night for you, yeah. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much. Love you all. Love you, teachers. Woohoo! Where's badge of honor?